Hey friends, we're going to take a few minutes to talk about development in general. I know we're looking at cognitive development with Piaget in class, but you need to have some background information. So get your note-taking guide handy and follow along. So in the learning chart, underneath developmental learning theory, it talks about stages. So we need to know, what is a stage? Why do they call it stages? Why do we have stages when development is continual? There's no pause in our growth. We don't just grow in for a little bit and then stop and then grow again. Kids, from the time they're infants, continue to grow. Well, here's the actual definition for what a stage is. When enough change has taken place for experts to notice, then it's called a stage. I don't know if it happened to you, but I remember my mom, when I hit middle school, junior high, saying, "Oh, you're just going through a stage." Well, she was more expert than I was, and so she noticed that change, and she was able to see it. So that means that I was going through a stage. So how do you push through the stages? How do you go through those stages? Because everybody goes through at their own rate. Well, they've decided that heredity and environment can influence the change, but cannot make the change. So here's what we're going to look at. This is not on your note-taking guide, so don't freak out. We're going to look at dialectical theory. So how does the environment you're in impact your development? Then perception. How do you see? How does that change your perceptions of items and the world around you? And then last, we're going to go through cognitive development theory. How does cognition grow and develop? So first is dialectical theory. Part of this is not going to be on your handout, so you just have to sit tight. I'll tell you when we get there, okay? There's 4 dimensions of the environment, of interaction between the individual and environment, between you and the world around you. The first is interbiological, and that usually happens in adolescence. Then individual psychological, it's your traits, tendencies, and talents. And then cultural sociological, and that's the kind of world you're born into, the kind of culture that you're born into. What's the predominant religion? What are the laws like? What are the mores that they operate by, and what are the traditions? In case you don't know, amore, it could mean love in Italian, but it really here means something that you do that's not it just has emerged through people. Like in France, you might greet each other with a kiss on the cheek, whereas here in the United States, we just wouldn't do that. And that would be amore. And then finally, the outer physical things that happen: climate, terrain, natural disasters. Okay, so you have a box that looks like this. At the top, you're going to put inner or outer. It means from inside you or outside you. It also could mean belly buttons, inner or outer. And physical on the left-hand side, physical, biological, and mental, psychological. So interbiological things that happen to you. They're physical things that are happening inside your body as you grow, or you develop hormones. You're affected by maybe allergies or diseases that you've had, or medications you might take. I remember when I was first teaching a long time ago, I was in a school where there was no air conditioning, and kids were on allergy medications. So I had to have the windows open because of the lack of air, and they were on their medications, but still in the afternoons they would just sort of be zoned out, some of them, barely awake, because the medications that they were taking were not non-drowsy like we have now. And so because of that, they're going to miss some things that other kids wouldn't miss during class. So it doesn't mean that their development is going to be worse. It just means it's going to be different. It's going to happen differently. So the next is outer physical, the natural physical, the things that happen around outside of you, the terrain you live in, the climate, the natural disasters. I came here from Chicago, where I was teaching before, and being from California, I had no clue as how cold it was in Chicago. It's really, truly insane. And so I would notice that kids weren't outside from probably end of September through March because the snow was, at my house, sometimes the snow was 6, 7 feet deep. And so kids spend a lot more time inside. Whereas in San Diego, kids spend a lot of time outside. So their physical development is going to be different than a kid in Chicago. But perhaps the kids in Chicago spend more time reading or, doing art or that kind of stuff. So in more indoor things. So their development is going to be different than kids in San Diego who are out running around and playing t-ball or whatever, So your individual psychological traits, tendencies, and talents. We'll get to a thing called multiple intelligences, and that's what that's all about, that we all have different sort of inbred abilities, that some are athletic and some aren't, and some are good at math and some people aren't. And then finally, cultural sociological, the religion, the laws, the mores, and the traditions of the area that you live in. A kid growing up in Africa or even in Sweden, they're going to have a whole different culture than we have. And so their development isn't bad or good, it's just different. So those are the 4 areas of the environment that help shape developmental change. Perception. This is sort of like Where's Waldo? When you're born, you start looking at things, and then you grow to looking for things. Some good friends of mine tried for a long time to have a baby, and finally they did, and they asked me to come over because my background's art, and paint a mural on the wall. So I did. It was a mural of Noah's Ark. It was beautiful, I have to say. And it was all in primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. So it was, it would stand off the wall, and the kid would really be able to look for things in the ark, right? When the baby was born, I went over to visit, and the wife had taken black and white strips of butcher paper and put them on the wall over my mural, because she had read that infants can only look at things, and they're looking at they can't tell color. They're looking at either dark or light. Eventually, she took the butcher paper down, and my mural emerged. So then the next thing that kids do is they start to systematic search. And that would mean you could say, when they're 2, maybe 3, go to the toy box and get me a ball. And they know that that's round compared to a truck that might be square or something. So they systematic search. And they're detecting details, and that detecting details gets stronger and stronger and stronger until they've been able to ignore irrelevant information. So as they hit 4 or 5, you're able to say, get me the orange fuzzy ball, and they're able to do that. So then we're on to cognitive development, Piaget. He has 4 stages of intelligence, 4 stages of development. The first is sensory motor, from birth to 1.5 to 2 years old. And intelligence is manifested in action. So if you give an infant a toy or a ball, what do they do with it? Probably immediately put it in their mouth. And that's what they should do, because they're using their senses, their 5 senses. They probably feel it, hug it, whatever, but usually it ends up in the mouth. I know some high school people that are going to teach high school say, why do we need to know this stuff? It's for little kids. Well, the thing that I want you to remember is someday, or even now, you may have your own kids, your own children. And if they're not doing things like, you give them a ball and they don't put it in their mouth, if that keeps happening past 2 years, you probably want to think about, maybe there's some developmental issues here. The next stage is pre-operational. It's 1.5 to 2 years old to 7. And they show their intelligence in language and symbolic schemata. Like, what's schemata with you? But you know what language is. They start to speak and talk and use their words. And symbolic schemata means that they can also use symbols. If you take a 3-year-old down the street and they see the golden arches, they would often say, ah, Happy Meal or McDonald's, right? That means that they're associating that symbol with something. And that's really the precursor to reading, because all you're doing is associating the symbols of letters with the sound of the letters. The next stage is concrete, operational, 7 to 12. And they're starting to use operations in their head to transform information for some purpose. And then the final is formal operations, 12 and older, where intelligence is manifested in thinking abstractly, generating hypotheses, and developing theories. Now, kids don't go through these in exactly the order or the years that are said here. Some kids develop faster, some kids develop slower. But these are the general accepted years that happen. So we're going to quickly look at this, just a different way of looking at it. I made these little clip arts down at the bottom, so I want you to see them. First is sensory motor, ages birth to 2. Then pre-operational, ages 2 to 7. Then concrete operational, that's 7 to 12, and you change from a girl to a boy. That's a joke. And then formal operational is 12 and up, and you get muscles, right? We've already seen this. Intelligence is manifested in action, motor behavior. Cause and effect starts, where if you put your hand on something hot, it's going to burn. The object permanence, and that means that just because an object leaves you, it doesn't mean that it's gone forever. You just can't see it. And curiosity begins to develop. You know, by 2 years old, they're curious about everything. Pre-operational, a child can use language and symbols. And egocentrism begins, which means you're sort of the center of your own universe. And in my opinion, that sort of stays the rest of your life. But they can't, at 2 to 7, they can't do these 4 things: conservation, relativism, categorization, and serialization. Later today in class, you're going to see exactly what those 4 things are. But right here, I'm not going to explain them in any more detail. Then concrete operational, they can start to transform information from one symbol to another, into another. They can use information. They can do conservation, relativism, categorization, and serialization, but they cannot think abstractly as well and no hypothesis for future kinds of things. And then formal, 12 and up, they can think abstractly, generate hypotheses, and develop theories. Abstract thinking begins, hypothetical reasoning, and theory development. But also remember, if you're a high school teacher, kids don't do that automatically. So how do you go from one stage to the next? These are really important words: assimilation and accommodation and equilibrium. Assimilation is fitting new information to an existing way of thinking. Accommodation is adapting a way of thinking to fit a new experience. And equilibrium is interaction, the overall interaction between existing way of thinking and new experiences. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to make another video that you're going to watch about these 3 words, because they're really important.